Today I am doing something interesting. I am stealing an idea from another booktuber. So Books with Benghis Khan had an amazing video that I watched recently that he does every year, and that is ranking every science fiction and fantasy series he has read at least 2 books from on a tier. So that's what I'm going to do today. I'll put his video in the description. It's great. Go check it out. The reason I want to copy him is because it really is a great way to track how your tastes change over time, because I can come back to this next year and just kind of re-rank everything and include new stuff, because I have a lot of series I've only read the first book in, so I definitely will be adding a lot to this. Now I have like 66 book series here or something, and let's just get right into it. First off, we got Elric of Melniboné, and that is A tier. It's A tier because I really enjoy it, but it kind of lulls. Like, the books aren't the most consistent. And speaking of inconsistent sword and sorcery, we can go right into Fritz Leiber's Swords and Deviltry, which is A tier. I really enjoy them, but because some of them are kind of like fix-ups where it's like short stories all being put into a book, some are better than others. Like the first one, Swords and Deviltry, Ilmet and Lonkmar is one of my favorite stories I've ever read from Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser, but the other 2 origin stories suck. So it's gonna go in A tier because the highs are very high, and that kind of fixes the lows. I will probably adjust as we go through this, because not only am I comparing them to one another, it's also kind of how I feel about them and stuff like that. Ex-Heroes by Peter Clines. This series is great. I don't know if I've ever seen anyone talk about it, and I don't know why. The premise is a zombie apocalypse with superheroes. It takes place in LA. These survivors are on like a movie lot, and they're trying to kind of turn this walled studio into a safe place for the survivors in Los Angeles. And the main character you follow is like kind of like Superman or something, and he's awesome. And every superhero in it is awesome. They're just a ton of fun. There's like 5 of them, I think. I don't think I've read the 5th one yet, but I really like them. Are they the greatest thing in the world? No, that's why they're on B. Let's move on. This one has a special place in my heart, and I think they're very well written, and that is Dark Imperium by Guy Haley. It's a trilogy that follows Roboute Guilliman in the Warhammer 40k universe. It was the trilogy that's like Guilliman's return from being dead, well, basically in stasis. It's like a little minor retcon, but they're really fun, and they give you a good taste of what 40k is like. I think the first one came out during 8th edition. The big theme of 8th edition was the Dark Imperium box set, which was Plague Marines versus Ultramarines, which I bought and painted them all, and my wife painted a lot of them too, and it's got a special place in my heart. And like I said, they are well written, so it's a good jumping off point for getting into 40k. This next one is gonna have to go to C, and that's Harry Turtledove's World War series. The premise is aliens invade during World War II, and we are a little more technologically advanced than they expected, so we put up more of a fight than should have happened. And so instead of this invasion just going off, it's just drawn out in a way that wasn't expected, and you see enemies of World War II becoming allies and just really weird stuff. Like, Harry Turtledove's not the best writer in the world, but they're very fun. It's like 10 books, and I really enjoyed them. I did own them all in hardcover, and I kind of regret selling them, but I don't regret freeing up like 2 feet of shelf space. So do with that as you will. This next one barely counts as a series. I don't know why they call it a series, because I haven't technically read the 2 that are together, and that's the Forever War by Joel Haldeman, but that's S tier. The other one I've read is Forever Peace, which is somehow part of the series, but has nothing to do with it. I don't know if that's just something a publisher decided to do, but the sequel to the Forever War is Forever Free, and I haven't read it yet, but I really want to. All of them are critically acclaimed, and there's a very good reason, so definitely read those. I know I talked about this in my tier ranking of the SF of all time, so definitely check that out. Next, we've got a series I am halfway through because there's 10 of them, and that is the Chronicles of Amber. The first half is like the Corwin saga. I actually want to make a review of them. They're fantastic. This series has completely blown me away. I can't believe that it took me this long to finally get to them. Granted, I started reading Zelazny last year and immediately fell in love with him, but I kept telling myself, I'm going to save the Chronicles of Amber. And then I was talking about him recently, and I thought, I need to read these things. So I dove right in. I read 5 of them in a week. I'm not going to do the next 5 in a week, but I should be getting to them relatively soon because they're just great. Here we have another C tier, and that is Harry Turtledove, How Few Remain. That's the first book in like an alternate history where the Confederacy won the Civil War. This one takes place in the 1880s, and the United States attacks the Confederacy because the Confederacy has annexed parts of Mexico so that they have their own version of Manifest Destiny. And I do enjoy the irony of the United States being salty that another nation has decided to take chunks of the West in order to expand across North America. It's just super funny. The books are good. Like after this one, you have World War I, and then you have like the Great Depression and the build up to World War II, and then you have World War II. And what Harry Turtledove does, because he's a historian, he takes historical events and transfers them into his alternate history. So instead of the Normandy invasion, which was the largest invasion from the sea in the history of the world, we have an invasion from the north into the Confederacy during World War II, and it's an aerial invasion. It's the largest aerial invasion in the history of the world. So just stuff like that. It's really interesting. There's a lot more fun in the world building and the exploring, like a what if, than there is in the characters overall and stuff. Like they're just kind of basic. And I will say this is not like a Lost Cause Southern like obsession thing. He doesn't glorify the Confederacy at all. It's literally like an apartheid state at the beginning of World War I. And overall, it's just really interesting. If you don't like alternate history, you're not going to like them. Next, we have DNF. I read the series, and that is Dark War by Glenn Cook. It's a trilogy that's science fantasy. It's very dark in a lot of ways. I just didn't vibe with it at all. I mean, other people might absolutely love it, but I didn't like the main character. The world building was interesting, but overall, not my thing. Next, we have Promise of Blood by Brian McClellan. This series is fine. It's the Powder Mage trilogy. It's going in B because it's entertaining, but it has a lot of flaws. Like you can tell he is a student of Brandon Sanderson, and that's not an insult. It's just that they kind of read a lot like Brandon Sanderson, but I don't know, like 10% worse, 20% worse. I can't really put a number to it. They're fine. They're fun to read, but they're not going to blow you away or change your life or anything. Unlike The Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson. I could not believe how fantastic it was when I read it for the first time when it came out in whatever it was, 2010 or 11 or whatever. I read The Way of Kings 4 times. I've read Words of Radiance 4 times, Oathbringer 3 times. And the reason I've read them so many is because I would reread them as the next one came out. But then I read them all again right before Rhythm of War. I've only read Rhythm of War once because I was not the biggest fan of it, but it's still one of the best fantasy series I've ever read. Like, why would it not be in S tier? I don't know who I'm trying to convince with this. I'm preaching to the choir when I'm talking about how good the Stormlight Archive is. This next one is DNF. I read 1.5 of them. I DNF'd the second one, and that's the Instrumentalities of the Night series by Glenn Cook. It is very flawed, very ambitious, but I just could not get through it. Maybe later in life, maybe if I read them on paper only, but I talked about it recently in another video. I was reading them through audio, and I thought it might be a bad narrator, so I started the second book, and then I went to it on paper, and I was like, I don't understand this at all. I mentioned it before. He takes like the 14th century and the Crusades and turns it into his fantasy world. It just was not for me. But what was for me, but I can only put it in A tier, is the Dread Empire series by Glenn Cook. It does a lot of things great. It does a lot of things that other fantasy series don't do, but most of it was written early in Glenn Cook's career, and it has flaws. The final book, which was supposed to be a trilogy, is rushed because it was written 24 years after the last one, and I'm just thankful that we got a conclusion to the series. But as I said, he wrote it way later. It's surprisingly good for such a huge gap, but it is rushed. There's a lot going on. I will say, like, the middle-ish books are outstanding. The 2 prequels that were like published in like the late 80s or mid 80s are so good, and then the 2 that were published in the late 80s are just something else. I really, really enjoy them. One of them involves sports betting as a way of politically maneuvering their way into a stronger position of power, and it is so good. It's so interesting. I really like it. It sounds stupid when I say like sports betting, but it's kind of like a military exercise. It's like a mix between like football and capture the flag or something, but it involves like 2 different branches of like the military, and they're competing, and then there's like professional teams and stuff like that. I don't know. He explains it in the book. It's really good. Let's move on. Now, these are S tier, and that is the Starfishers trilogy by Glenn Cook. Holy crap. So I had no idea that Glenn Cook was ever capable of writing something as good as the Black Company series, but he did it in a completely different genre. This is some of the best military science fiction I have ever read. Part of the Starfishers trilogy, I'm going to include Passage at Arms, which is like a semi-prequel. Absolutely love them. There is very few science fiction books that make me feel the way I did when I read Passage at Arms. It is like up there with the Forever War when it comes to this raw, emotionally deep novel about being in combat. Definitely worth checking out. I made a review of them. Did I? I did make a review of them. One of my Glenn Cook updates. Next, we have like my new fantasy goat, and that is Sailing to Sarantium by Guy Gavriel Kay, part of the Sarantine Mosaic. It technically counts because it is fantasy, and it is 2 books, and 2 books count as a series. I love it. It's a masterpiece. I made a review of them. So good. I mean, like, Guy Gavriel Kay is a genius, and it helps that he just ticked like all the boxes that matter to me. We've got Byzantium. We've got just wonderful writing. We have a main character that I adore, a cast of characters that I adore. It's just everything is perfect. What is not a masterpiece, and it actually gets dragged down to C because the second book is so bad, is the Kings of the Wild series by Nicholas Ames. I really liked Kings of the Wild. It was like a A-tier book, but the second one, which is like Bloody Rose or whatever, I did not like at all. I thought it was terrible. I mean, it just completely tanked. Like, I wanted to DNF the book from about a third of the way through until I finished it. I just kept thinking, it can't be that bad. Like, it's got to end in a really good way or something. No, it literally ended in a way that I guessed at like the 40% mark. I was like, oh, this is going to happen. This is going to happen. And it's going to be like, oh yeah, blah, blah, blah. That's exactly what happened. There was not a single surprise for me in the last half of the book, and I just could not stand it. Now, these are going to get a B tier. No, they're not. They're going in A tier. They probably should be in B tier because of the later books, but I don't know that yet. I've read the first 4 Wildcards book, and they'll go B tier. They're very entertaining. Edited by George R. R. Martin. You've got writers like George R. R. Martin, Roger Zelazny, Harold Waldrop. There's a lot of writers in here that are really good, and in later ones, you get people like Daniel Abraham. So I really like them. It is basically superheroes have come into being from a alien virus that has created aces, who are people with powers that don't look like hideous monsters, and jokers who look like hideous monsters and sometimes have nice powers, but most of the time are just disfigured and their life is ruined, which is maybe better than the 80% of the people that get the wildcard virus and just die. So it's very dark. The first 3 books are absurdly brutal. I mean, like, holy crap. The first one is just kind of an introduction with a little dark elements in it. The second one is like traumatic. And the third one just is like, oh, you thought you were traumatized. Let's ratchet that up a little. Those aren't for the faint of heart, but man, they're very good. Here it is. This series completely blew me away this year, and that was the Red Rising trilogy. I haven't read the sequels yet. Holy crap. I loved Red Rising from the first chapter. It's so good. It's just so over the top, action-packed. I love the characters. I love the world. I just cannot say enough nice things about Red Rising. And if you like stuff like Brandon Sanderson, you will like Red Rising. It's very action-packed. Well, I say that, but I don't know, because I figured out recently that I don't really fit the mold of most Sanderson fans, and I'm not saying that as like a flex. My buddy sends me like the worst of the worst from the like Sanderson Facebook groups, which it is Facebook, but I'm like, what is happening? What is wrong with these people? And he's like, bro, I don't know. But he really likes the Stormlight Archive to the point that he's read them like way more than I have. And I was like, I think he would like this. And I gave him Red Rising, and he is obsessed. So maybe they work together. I have an anecdotal evidence of one, so take that with a grain of salt. Speaking of taking things with a grain of salt, Twilight, I've read the entire series. It's still going in the D in F because it's terrible. I read them when they were new, when everyone was reading them. I've seen the movies, all that. Twilight is not only like not written very well, there's a lot of very problematic stuff in there. Like in the third book, it not only explains to you how grooming works, it tells you it's okay. No, you cannot groom children in order to have them like marry you and be with you when they're adults. That is horrifically unethical and wrong. Why is that in this book? I don't understand. Also, we have a vampire that is 100 years old who is only interested in teenage girls. It is gross. And I guess I will just leave that there. I'm sure lots of people have bullied and picked on Twilight, so I don't have much to add beyond like, why is this grooming the book? Thieves World. This is going to go in C, only because I really like them, but they are collections of short stories. So there's a lot of stinkers, and the ones that are like magnificent, like aren't S tier. So I definitely put it there. It's really fun. It's like a shared universe. It's like a shared world for sword and sorcery stories that was created by Robert Lynn Asprin, who's on this list for other things. And they're very good. It's just, you got to put them in C because it's an anthology collection, and we'll move on. The Knight by Gene Wolfe. This is going in A because it's the Knight and the Wizard. It's duology, and I might just be too dumb for it. I bet if I read them again, they'll go into S tier. It's like Portal Fantasy-ish, but it's written by Gene Wolfe. So have fun figuring out what's going on. It's not that it's incomprehensible. It's just that there are so many layers to it that the surface story, very good. It's about this young kid. He is from Earth-ish, I think. He doesn't really know. His memories from before he was in this place are fading or gone. And then he is mentored and he becomes a knight. And sounds like there's not a lot going on in it, but holy crap, there is. And it's as beautiful as everything else Gene Wolfe has written. Shaman's Crossing. This is going in B tier. I wasn't the biggest fan of the trilogy by Robin Hobb when I finished it. I've been thinking about it a lot since then, and I think I might bump it up a tier if I read it again. I'm not sure, but I do think that it has some issues, or it might just be that it's not a style of book that is for me, which makes me worry about Realm of the Elderlings. Then again, all the Realm of the Elderlings superfans don't like the Soldier Son trilogy, so I really don't know what to think or how to feel about the books. Like, they're fine. They're probably not her best work. I don't know. I haven't read anything else, but like, they're not bad. This next one we have, which is one of the greatest of all time, is The Book of the New Sun by Gene Wolfe. I mean, holy crap. I've read 3 of the 4. I thought I had read the 4th one. I think I started the 4th one, but like, I could feel my brain dribbling out of my ears. I was overwhelmed, and then I like convinced myself that I'd finished it, but I didn't. So I really got to read them again. What I think I'm going to do is refresh myself with one of the Gene Wolfe podcasts about the first 3 books, and then just go into the 4th one. And I really don't care if stuff gets spoiled for me for it. I'm there for the experience this time, much more than I am for the kind of reading it and figuring it out myself. But anyways, yeah, Book of the New Sun. How would it not be S tier? I mean, like, I would like to know what borderline illiterate monster is like. Book of the New Sun is whack. And it's like, well, you're whack. Let's move on to a solid B tier, because I don't really know if much of Asimov's writing can be above B tier. And that is the Robot series by Isaac Asimov. I've got the Caves of Steel here. I've read it, and I've read like 2 of the short story collections of the Robot books, and they're good. Caves of Steel is probably better than the Robot stories because I like a detective story, and the Caves of Steel takes like the traditional like hard-boiled detective story and puts it into an interesting world. And it's B tier instead of C tier because I think Asimov has a much wider audience than something like Harry Turtledove. Here we go, another S tier. Look at that. Joe Abercrombie's First Law series. It is just about perfect. I will say I don't know if I like the newest ones more than the earlier ones. I actually kind of like the standalones more, but that's only because The Heroes and Red Country are like my 2 favorite books in the entire series. So I'm a little biased. I mean, Best Served Cold is like fine. I really enjoy like the cast in Best Served Cold, but I think Best Served Cold would have been best served by being like a hair shorter. But other than that, yeah. I mean, First Law series, like, why would it not be S tier? I should arrange these in order of like how good they are. Crap. I should have been doing that this whole time. Yeah, I don't want to do that. So never mind. Next we have what is probably my favorite fantasy series of all time. That's a bold statement. Maybe I'm wrong. Dresden Files by Jim Butcher. Like, nothing does what the Dresden Files does. Like, how do you get that far into a series and you're somehow getting better and better and better? Every book he puts out in that series is just slightly better than the last one. So when you get up to what, 18 now, like, holy crap. It's like compound interest when it comes to the quality of the book. It's just incredible. So yeah, you can't go wrong with Dresden Files. Everyone I've given the Dresden Files to has loved it. My wife and I binged the series over like a few months. It almost became a race She had to stay one behind me because we were checking them out from our library in audiobook form, which is the way to experience the series. This is going to go in DNF, and that is Brandon Sanderson's Skyward trilogy. It's like YA, but it's science fiction, and I kind of avoided a lot of YA stuff because I didn't want to pad my DNF section with stuff like Divergent and Maze Runner and all that crap, Hunger Games. So anyways, I have this on here because it is popular. It's Brandon Sanderson, but much as I love his writing, Skyward is good. Starlight, the sequel, is Skyward with extra steps. So it just seems like completely unoriginal. And I didn't enjoy the second one to the point that I never read the third one because I just don't care. Next, we have a very middle of the road series that is a lot of fun, and that is John Scalzi's Lock-In series. There's 2 of them, plus like a little standalone thing that's like a fake history of the disease in the series. People get this disease that leaves them locked in, like their brain works, but their body cannot move. And so what they end up creating are these implants that allow them to communicate and eventually to be inside of a Threep, which is a robot like C-3PO, and they can control it and experience life as a relatively normal person. It's just a good series. Next, we have S tier, Mistborn Era 2, which a lot of people wouldn't put as S tier, but I don't care. I love Wax and Wayne. I love the entire series. The final book had issues, and it's the same issues that I've been experiencing with more recent Sanderson books, but I love them to the point that I joked with my wife and I was like, if we have twin boys, we're gonna name them Wax and Wayne, right? And she's like, no. I really, really enjoy them. They deserve to be up there. You know, the people that don't rate them very high must not like fun, because the series is very, very fun. Now, the Expanse series is going in A tier, and it's going in A tier because I am salty. And the reason I am salty is because I adored the series for the first 7 books-ish. And then I read the first one that has like a time jump of like 20 years or 25 years or whatever. And not only did I hate it because it had a time jump, it recycled a bunch of the plots from previous books, basically took like the last 3 or 4 books and just took little chunks out of each one and just did it again. And I really, really hate the trope of we got to get together one last time, even though we're sick of each other, and we got to get this done. And it's like, bleh. And then to the point that I haven't read the rest of the series. I've been told that the payoff is worth it, but for now it's staying in A. Maybe it will redeem itself with the last couple books when I finally get to them. We'll see. I'm waiting on Carlos from StoryTube to get to the last few, and then I will read them. Riverworld. This series, C? B? We're gonna go with C. I really like them, but the last few are really strange to the point that I was like speed reading them and not really interested anymore. The first 2 are very, very good. You follow Richard Burton, I think, and Mark Twain. But what this is every human that has ever died is like wakes up in like peak physical condition with all their memories on this world that is one winding river that covers the entire planet, and no one knows where it goes. No one knows really where to go or how to do anything. There's like big mountains, so it's basically like these almost fjord type things in some places, and it's very strange science fiction. There's like this weird mystery, and like I don't really care for the payoff, but they are good. If you're gonna read some Philip Jose Farmer, start with the first Riverworld book, which is To Your Scattered Bodies Go or something. Very trippy, very like new wave science fiction era. So this is out of order because this is technically like the second series in the collection, but I am putting this at A tier, and that is the Shadow series in Orson Scott Card's Enderverse. Orson Scott Card's a turd, yes, please don't tell me in the comments, I know. Ender's Shadow follows Bean, who was like part of Ender's Game. He's the youngest, smallest, but also the smartest of them, and Ender's Shadow is Ender's Game but seen from Bean's point of view. And that's like the forking point. So you have Ender's Game as the Ender Saga, and you have Ender's Shadow as like Bean's saga. And the cool thing about Bean's saga is while Ender goes off into space and it's all this goofy philosophical crap, the Bean saga is action-packed, like science fiction, techno thriller type stuff. There's a lot of like combat, a lot of interesting things, because in Ender's Game, you take all these children who are geniuses and you train them to be some of the greatest military leaders ever, like some of the greatest fighters ever. Well, the Shadow series is about the after effects of sending all those kids back to their home countries. So you have these different power structures that have been destabilized by having having some of the greatest military commanders of all time go back and, start commanding the militaries of their countries. So there's a lot of political stuff. It's very interesting. Lord of the Rings. I am going to rank Lord of the Rings as B tier. Maybe it goes up when I read it again. I doubt it. I understand why Lord of the Rings is so important, but like if I had just The Hobbit on this list, it would be S tier. I like The Hobbit more than Lord of the Rings. And yeah, if I keep expanding on my like middling views on the Lord of the Rings, I will just make more and more people mad. At one point, someone told me maybe I'll understand them better when I'm older, but I read them for the first time 25 years ago, so I don't know how much older I have to be to understand Lord of the Rings, so we'll move on. Staunchly in the B tier, which is slowly becoming entertaining but not the best, is Monster Hunter International by Larry Correia. This series is like toxic masculinity, over-the-top action stuff like 80s and 90s action movies, but we're hunting monsters. Yes, it's wish fulfillment. It's fun wish fulfillment. It's just a dude who happens to be really good at shooting and fighting who gets roped into hunting monsters. So that's about it. Cast is interesting. Later in the series, you follow some other POVs that I really like. One of them is a dude who is a werewolf, and it's just cool. Not the best, not the worst, just a lot of fun. Next, we've got Dragon Riders of Pern, which is going to go in B tier because it's been a long time since I've read them. I really like them. They're very entertaining. I don't know if they're like earth shattering in the way that, some of the stuff above it is. I will say that how I got into the Dragon Riders of Pern, which is like science fantasy, is I read a short story in the Legends collection edited by Robert Silverberg, and it was literally about a girl like running to deliver something or just running as part of a competition. I can't really remember, but her being in the Pern world and just McCaffrey's writing and just sold it for me. And after that, I read like 6 of them in a row, just binged them over like a month. Can't be too bad, but that was 15, 16 years ago, so I don't know how much I remember of it. Harry Potter is going to go in the B tier, C tier. Harry Potter's going in C tier for a few reasons. One, I am a hater and it's too popular and it makes me mad, but also because if you look at Harry Potter at anywhere below like a surface level, it falls apart immediately. Like, how stupid does a series have to be where your only 2 options after going to school are work for the government or not? Like, it's really weird. There's so few people that like own businesses or do anything outside of like working for the government. I don't know if this is some weird like statist thing that J.K. Rowling has going on in it. And the other thing is like this entire series is built on people having reality altering powers but don't have a traditional education above the 5th grade level. I just find that absolutely insane. But yeah, I don't know. Harry Potter's fine. Great when you're like a kid or a teenager, but like don't think about it too much. And also the fact that I really don't think she knew where any of it was going until she just like made it up in the 5th book. So I don't know. I do enjoy the theory that people say she sold her soul to the devil, even though the devil's not real. But the way she acts now, maybe she did. Anyways, Ender's Game going in A tier with Ender's Shadow. I love the Enderverse. I really like how over the top and stupid and philosophical the Ender's books became. The later ones are just weird, but still fun, so I'll put them there. I actually like Ender's Shadow better. We'll move Ender's Game down. Going in B tier. Ender's Shadow is better. No, I will not elaborate any more than I already have. Aragon. This is going to go in C tier, but it might move up. Yes, it is the original Star Wars trilogy, but fantasy. But I've heard that the most recent one is a little better, and I really liked the world. I really liked the way the magic system works. I thought the ending to the original like run was terrible, but like the dragons are cool, the magic's cool, so they're really fun. But yeah, it's got to be in C tier. It's not like a turd or anything, but speaking of turds, the Witcher series, I couldn't get past the second one. I was so incredibly bored. I just did not like them. I like the short stories in The Last Wish or whatever. Those are really good. I love the brutality of the fights. I really like the world. I just don't care about the characters. Like, that's about it for that. I think the coolest thing I remember is when he's hunting some monster in like a castle and he's all high on drugs. It's awesome. I mean, what is cooler than hunting monsters high on drugs? Broken Angels. This is going in B. It could go to A if the third one's good, but this is the Takeshi Kovacs series. I think that it is some of the better cyberpunk. It doesn't hold up compared to the other stuff above it. The first book is really interesting. You have consciousness is stored inside a little rice-sized chip at the base of your skull. And when you die, that little thing is put in basically a server farm, and you can be put into a new body if you have enough money, or if not, you get basically put in cold storage where people can pay to bring you back every once in a while to talk to you. It's very unsettling because you realize, like, is consciousness the only thing that makes me human? You have these Methuselahs, who are these wealthy people who are hundreds and hundreds of years old, who just keep getting richer. Like, imagine what we have now with all the turds that are billionaires that just have the like dragon syndrome where they just hoard wealth, but now make them like 500 years old. So they just keep getting richer and richer and more powerful. And yeah, it's pretty unsettling. And the second one is completely different. It's really, really good. I'm moving it to A tier. Screw it. They're good. I highly recommend them to a lot of people. Eisenhorn. Eisenhorn is also B or A tier because it is probably one of the best introductions to the Warhammer 40k universe, because you're following essentially a detective. This is a crime novel that involves a dude with psychic abilities, and throughout the series, he descends deeper and deeper into darkness because in order to fight the monsters, he himself has become a monster, but he doesn't think that. He is an unreliable narrator. He keeps talking about these things where he's like, yeah, I got this thing. It's not really approved of by the rest of the people in my order, but it's what I had to do to accomplish a mission. And yeah, once you start putting the pieces together, you're like, are we the baddies? Is he a baddie? So it's really, really good. Myth Adventures. This is going to go in fun, but also kind of stupid. Robert Lynn Asprin made the Myth series, which is just stupid puns, one after another. I think the main character, his little homie, the green guy, his name is Az, like AAHZ or something. It's just stupid puns, like Myth Adventures is misadventures, that kind of thing. If you're dumb like me, you'll rate it as a B. If you have more than 2 brain cells, you might put it in D and F. I don't know. They're fun. Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones is A tier. Now, it is A tier because it's been a very long time since I've read them. And I honestly like everything George R.R. Martin has written outside of Game of Thrones as much or more than a Game of Thrones. I keep saying a Game of Thrones, but it's a Song of Ice and Fire. I know, but that's what it says here because that's what they named the movie, or that's what they named the TV show. And so now it's just called Game of Thrones. Thank you, HBO. I like them. I bet if I read them again, they'll go up to S tier. Maybe I was missing something the first time I read them. I will say that they just, completely changed the way I look at fantasy. So when I read them again, which will be when the next book has a release date, then they'll probably get bumped to S tier. But for now, they're going to stay there. C tier. Sword of Truth series by Terry Goodkind. I made a video about the entire series. Go watch that instead of reading them. I'm only putting it in C tier because this is the reason I read fantasy. Like before this, I had read Lord of the Rings and was like, that's not very good. And then I read this and I was like, this is edgy. This is cool, because I was 14. And so, yeah, it's going in C tier for nostalgia. Should be in D and F tier. Just go watch my video about how stupid it is, and it's better than reading the book. This next one, I had forgotten I had read, but I have the most beat to death copy ever of this paperback. And this is Greg Bear's Songs of Earth and Power. It's going to go in B tier, but it is also another one that will probably go up when I read them again. I really want to read them again because they are so different than any fantasy I have ever read. It's just really out there, which makes sense because Greg Bear is not known for writing like the most traditional of anything. So yeah, B tier. Dying Earth. Dying Earth is A tier, and the reason it is A tier and not S tier is because the first Dying Earth is just a kind of collection of the short stories that took place in the Dying Earth that he wrote in like the 50s, and they're not very good. Like they're good, but they're not like Kugel Saga good. So Eyes of the Overworld and Kugel Saga, the 2 middle books, are S tier. I absolutely adore them. Some of the best picaresques ever written. And then we have Rialto the Marvelous, which is just another collection of like short stories kind of packed together as a fix-up. And one of them is S tier and the other stories are just like not the best. So it gets A tier for that. Malazan, S tier. Where else am I going to put that? It's one of the best series ever written. What do you want me to say? Like, go to every booktube channel and listen to them gush about Malazan. I love it. I love it for the Unga Bunga caveman stuff much more than the compassion stuff. But that's the thing that makes the series great. Got crazy action, really cool characters, and then a lot of philosophizing that I might be too dumb to understand, but I still like it a lot. Narnia, that goes in DNF. Narnia is far too Catholic for me, even though C.S. Lewis wasn't Catholic. He used a lot of Catholic themes in this and other Christian themes, and yeah, I don't care. It's just fine. It's like children's book that I don't like. Now I'm putting Star Wars as an entire like spanning everything thing in B, because there are a lot of A tier stuff, but there's a lot of C and D tier stuff. I really like the trilogy by Timothy Zahn. The Heirs of the Empire, I think, is the first one. I can't remember. Really good trilogy. It's the Thrawn trilogy. And we have other stuff crazy enough, like Kevin J. Anderson's Jedi series or Jedi Academy series or whatever. It's good. Might be the only good thing he's ever written. I don't know. I need to read more Kevin J. Anderson because everyone poo-poos his stuff, but I have fun with his Star Wars stuff. So yeah, it's going here because it's Star Wars. And it's the non-canonical stuff. Legends, I believe is what it's called. I love them. I'm very mad that lore that's in my head is now worthless. So let's move on before I get sad. Black Company, right up there is one of the best fantasy series I've ever read. Probably right behind Dresden Files. It's Glenn Cook. What am I supposed to say? I have a Glenn Cook tattoo. You want to hear about Glenn Cook? I've got like 4 or 5 videos now. I'm almost done reading his bibliography. The Black Company is a masterpiece. Shadows Linger is one of the best fantasy books ever written. It is a perfect blending of gothic horror and dark fantasy. You see this descent into madness from these decisions that you make because either you thought it was the best one or you didn't have a choice, and every decision leads you further and further down path of darkness. And each book has its own flavor in a way that other series don't match. I mean, you have a lot of military fantasy in the Black Company series, but like I said, the second book is gothic horror. It's just really good. I mean, some of the later books almost read like a supernatural horror because of this intermingling of gods and death cults and stuff like that. Definitely some cosmic horror too, the infinite universe and how terrifying that can be, and that it does not care about you at all is just in some of those stuff as early as The White Rose. Yes, I've been thinking about this series a lot. Watch out for a video about it in a few months when I read the series again. Horus Heresy is going to go in B tier because there's a lot of stinkers, but the first 5 books are bangers, and then Betrayer and the Ultramarines one that is leaving my brain right now, Betrayal at Calth. There you go. Betrayer and Betrayal at Calth, I think. Those are S tier as well. So it's going in the B tier, but it's probably C or D and F for everyone that's not a Warhammer nerd. Now this series, the Recluse Saga, the Saga of Recluse by Elie Modesitt Jr. is going in B tier because it is very entertaining, but it's not blow your mind like the other stuff. A lot of the books recycle the same like farm boy made good trope. Unlike this one, Ordermaster, and this is part of the run where a older gentleman becomes like the hero, and I really enjoy those in the run. The prequels, basically the like 3 Sayador books I think that take place very early chronologically, are also really good. You get to see kind of chaos magic utilized in a way to bring order and the kind of cause and effect of that kind of thing, like the rebound. So that's really fun. Like the whole series is built on order magic and chaos magic. Chaos is destructive, order unites. When one gets powerful, the other one gets as powerful to match it. So there's this constant power creep throughout the series that almost feels like it needs a hard reset. And that is one of the problems with the series. It's like the 3rd book or something is the hard reset. So then you read the rest and you're like, why am I reading these? That's what happened to my buddy. He just stopped caring after that. I suggest reading them in chronological order, not publication order. And we'll go from there. The Space Odyssey series by Arthur C. Clarke. It is B. I like 2001, but they are forgettable. I mean, Arthur C. Clarke is great. I love Rendezvous with Rama. I love The Fountains of Paradise and Childhood's End broke me. So it has nothing to do with the writing ability. I just don't think it's as good as his other stuff, and it doesn't hold up compared to the rest of the books above it. Here we go. One of the top, actually, this might be my favorite fantasy series of all time, and that's The Wheel of Time. I mean, it's so nice. I've read it thrice. I absolutely adore the series. It's been a while since I've read them. I haven't read them since the final one came out, but man, they're so good. And when I made a video last year about some little known facts about the Wheel of Time, I started doing a deep dive into the lore again, and I just fell in love. Again, every time I get into that series, there's something else I love about it. The first time I read it, I was like 17, and I'm like, oh, this is so good. This is blowing my mind. This is fantasy as it ought to be written. and I just loved it. I read it again a couple years later, and I was like, wow, this, just as good as I remember, but I kind of changed the way I looked at it and the stuff I focused on. And then the third time, I just looked at it as an adult instead of a teenager. And Brandon Sanderson actually talked about that when he was reading them again before he wrote the final three. And he said the first time he read them, he was a teenager, and he sided with like Matt and Rand and Perrin and was like, oh yeah, these grown-ups, they're just, telling them what to do, blah, blah, blah. I can't believe all that. And then he said as an adult when he read them, he's like, these kids are stupid. Why are they so stupid? Listen to your elders. So it's just great. Like, a series is good when you can come back to it later in life, and it is fantastic, but in a completely different way because you have changed. The books have not changed, but your experiences will just make them something different and better the second time. So if you've read them and didn't vibe with them, or read some of them and didn't vibe with them, but you're older now, try them again because it might be a different series for you. Garrett Files. This goes in A tier because it's not philosophically life-changing like a lot of the A and S tier stuff, but its entertainment level is so high and it does so many things that you don't see in other fantasy that it has to be an A tier. I mean, the worst book in the series is still a 3-star read. It's still good, but the average is 4 point whatever stars for me. They're very good books. They're very fun, and yeah, they just deserve to be there. I made a video about them too if you want to check it out. Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. This is a tier. I love this trilogy. All 5 books are great, and I mean, not much else to say. It's very funny. If you don't like funny stuff, I guess you won't like them. The closest equivalent is probably Discworld, but I don't know if Douglas Adams was as smart as Terry Pratchett. Maybe if he had more time. But I don't know, because toward the end of the Hitchhiker's Guide trilogy, book 4 and 5 are almost too philosophical for me. I like the way you learn to fly is by falling and then forgetting to hit the ground. It's great. Just stuff like that. I adore this series. Speaking of a series I adore that is S tier, that is the Earthsea series by Ursula K. Le Guin. Ursula K. Le Guin is probably the greatest science fiction and fantasy writer of all time when you combine just her prowess in both genres and how she didn't write a lot of one and then write a lot of the other. It was kind of intermingled throughout her entire career. No one else was able to shift genre gears like that and write at the same level as her, except maybe Roger Zelazny. Go read Earthsea. It's magnificent. I mean, the first book is young adult-ish, but man, I just love it. And I really love the second one, The Tombs of Atuan, which a lot of people don't like. I think it's just magnificent. It is such an interesting narrative structure that you literally don't see in any other book. Mistborn Era 1 is S tier. I mean, I like Mistborn Era 2 the same. You thought I was going to say better. I would have made you mad. Mistborn Era 1 has so many things going for it that Mistborn Era 2 does not. I think Mistborn Era 1 is the best introduction to Brandon Sanderson's fantasy, and it's one of the best introductions for non-fantasy readers. They're good reads, good world building, interesting enough characters, and they're fun. And I think that's really important when you're getting people into fantasy. And so, yeah, this has to be at the top. I mean, The Well of Ascension is one of my favorite books of all time in the Cosmere series. It is so good, and I know a lot of people don't like it, but there are scenes in it that I think about almost daily. So, I mean, how could it not be that high up? Here's an interesting one that is C, but is still very good. It's the Tripods trilogy by John Christopher. This trilogy got me into science fiction. What it's about is basically War of the Worlds from H.G. Wells. These tripods with aliens in them land and just start subjugating the human race. This takes place after that has already happened, and humans live barely above the 1790s type tech. They have a little technology that's given them by the aliens. Aliens show up for putting these plates on people's heads to control them. I don't know why the aliens didn't kill everyone or, just put them in breeding pens or something. Why do they have these people with plates? Honestly, they probably just should have committed genocide. Maybe, I don't know. But anyways, I like it. It's very good. I can't wait to have my daughter read them. She's almost old enough. I think she'll really like them. Here is another greatest fantasy series of all time, and that is Discworld. Every Discworld book is amazing. Pyramids is the only one that is just mediocre so far that I've read. I've read the first 8 and I love them. I haven't even got to the good ones yet. One of the things about Discworld that just puts it so much higher than just about everything else is Terry Pratchett really shows off his understanding of the fantasy genre. The more well-read you are in fantasy, the more rewarding the Discworld novels are, especially the early ones. You have his equivalent of Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser, Conan the Barbarian, all these different wonderful fantasy tropes and themes are there, but they're there in a way that just brings you joy. And so, like I said, the more well-read you are, the better the books get. So it's just great to be able to read them once when you're young and enjoy them for what they are. And then later on, like I did, after I've read a lot of classic fantasy, it just made them so much better and just completely new books. And that's not something that you get with a lot of other series, other than Wheel of Time, like I said. Next, we have Dune. How could Dune not be S tier? Dune is S tier not because of the first few books. Dune is S tier because God Emperor of Dune is so much better than just about everything on this list by itself. I love that book. I even love Heretics of Dune. The book is awesome. Both of those are just so different than the first three that, like, I know why people don't like them, but I absolutely love them, and they're the reason Dune is S tier. Like, if it was just the first three, it'd probably be A tier, because Dune Messiah is fine to good, and Children of Dune is just like okay. Book 4 and 5 that elevate the series. Speaking of elevate the series, we've got Old Man's War, which is entertaining, but doesn't really do anything different. It actually gets dragged down by the sequels. I think Old Man's War on its own is magnificent, and then the rest are very good, but not as good as Old Man's War. Old Man's War is such a wonderful homage to things like the Forever War and Starship Troopers. It's got to go here. I made a Scalzi video not too long ago, like a guide for reading his works. I don't have much else to say about that. The Bulgariad series by David Eddings. That's DNF, and it's DNF for two reasons. One, I found out that David Eddings probably a monster before he became an author. You can look it up online, but anyways, I can't separate the art from the artist anymore. And not to mention, like, I read the first 3 or 4, and they were just like very childish and not very good. So I DNF the series, so it would have been here regardless of whether or not he was terrible. But yeah, let's move on from that. The Foundation series by Isaac Asimov is going to go in B tier, and it is not as good as like the Robot series, mostly because I don't think Isaac Asimov is really like the best writer. Like, he has interesting concept, but very poor execution a lot of the time. Foundation is good, especially for what it is, and I enjoy it, but the further I get into the series, the less I care. I've read like the first 2 or 3. Maybe I'll feel different this time, but it's not like I read them that long ago. Now, we've been talking about a lot of B tier science fiction. Let's get some S tier science fiction, and that is the Culture series by Ian M. Banks. I mean, holy crap, the Culture is perfect. I love Consider Phlebas, even though everyone says it's one of the weakest books in the series. I like that it shows you a view outside of the culture before you have all these books that are very focused on being in the culture. And the culture is a collection of sapient computers that have trillions of other sapient beings as pets, including humans. And the culture is both awe-inspiring and terrifying, and it deserves to be S tier because Ian M. Banks was a genius. And losing him as early as we did is a travesty for the literary community. Another Orson Scott Card that goes in B tier because Seventh Son and the entire Alvin the Maker series is wonderful. You have 1830s-ish America, and what Orson Scott Card did was he wanted to write an epic fantasy inspired by folklore, but for America. So much of fantasy is built around medieval Europe, and what he wanted was something that was very American and very not Europe in the Middle Ages or medieval Europe. And so what you have is Alvin, who is the seventh son of a seventh son, and that gives him magical abilities that are incredibly rare. I mean, how rare is the seventh son of a seventh son? You have an exploration of Native Americans and how they are treated, and you have the South, who instead of being part of the United States, it's like a rogue British Empire type thing. Basically, the House of Stuart, who left England, went to the South. They still have slaves. America is not the way we had it in the 1830s. So it ticks the box of alternate history that I love, fantasy, and just guns and fantasy, which I need, but there's not a lot of guns. I love it. It's just very, very good. And I have all of them now, except for Crystal City in first edition. And I'm kind of bummed. I don't think that the series will be completed. And also, Orson Scott Card kind of sucks. So even if he does finish it, I hope it's not bad. His writing's never been bad like he is as a person. Kind of feels icky. It's another art and artist type thing. Not nearly as bad as like David Eddings. Yeah, Card's a bigot, but just buy his books used or pirate them or something. I don't know. And the last one, which is going to go in A tier, and that is Larry Correia's Hard Magic. That's the first book in the Grimoire Chronicles. The thing that makes this A tier is the same thing that makes Orson Scott Card series B tier. And that is, no one else has done something like this. He takes essentially like X-Men or superheroes and puts them in the 1930s. It's like this noir feeling story in the first book, but people have abilities, and these magic abilities came around in like the 19 teens, and no one really knew why. And you slowly get this bigger and bigger world, and these abilities, you get a better understanding of them and where they came from, and all these different politics. And I think that Larry Correia does a really good job of having just over the top action, which he always does in like the best ways. Very good characters, the unparalleled world building because no one else has done something like this. And I just really, really like it. I think about the final fight in this series way more often than I should. There has never been an epic battle in a fantasy series to match the last one in that series, which is a very bold statement because, I mean, have you read the last 200 pages of Oathbringer? Yeah, it's just ridiculous. It's very, very good. And I'd recommend it to anyone who wants to try something that is different than what they're used to. It's fun, fast-paced, entertaining, and man, the narration by Bronson Pinchot is so good. So definitely check that out. That's it for my list. I want to thank Ben for encouraging me to do this, stealing his little concept. Let me know where you would have ranked some of these things, and let me know if there's anything that I should be reading that's not on this list. Like I said, I have a lot of series where I've read just the first book that will be on here by this time next year. Yeah, I don't have much else to add. I think I did a lot of talking. My throat's starting to hurt. I want to thank you for watching. And with that, I'll see you next time.